The Giants have been arguably the most aggressive team in baseball when it comes to handing out qualifying offers to players who are kind of on the bubble in terms of should they get one or should they not. That's how Brandon Belt was brought back last season. It's how Kevin Gausman came back for his second year in San Francisco. And so this year they have one obvious candidate in Carlos Rodon and one fringe candidate maybe in Joc Pederson. So we'll get into those cases and what the Giants are going to do next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, I wanted to discuss the 2022 qualifying offer because we had a report over the weekend from, I think it was Joel Sherman, as to what the qualifying offer number is going to be. And this number is set by averaging the top 125 highest paid players in baseball. So it changes each and every year. And last year it actually went down for the first time, I think, ever. So it normally goes up, right? But because of COVID-19 and just suppressed spending habits of teams, it actually went down to $18.4 million last year. But this year, according to Joel Sherman of the New York Post, that number is up to $19.65 million. And as I mentioned, the Giants have been aggressive in handing these out. And the way it works, you can't just give it to anybody. You can only give it to players who have never received one in the past and players who were on your team all season long. You can't have acquired them mid-season. And also they have to be free agents at the end of the year. And so for the Giants, there aren't many players who even qualify on their team to receive it, and there certainly aren't many players who would even be under consideration. So the impending free agents on the Giants include Brandon Belt, but he's received one in the past, so he's ineligible. And really, it's Carlos Rodon. If he opts out, he'll be a free agent, and he was on the team all year, and he's never received one in the past. And then Joc Pederson. There's also, Jose Alvarez, but there's just zero chance they would offer him what equates to a one-year deal worth upwards of $19 million, 19.65. And so Carlos Rodon is an obvious candidate because, he's not just a candidate. He's definitely going to get this because he's essentially with the player option for next year at $22.5 million. He is essentially already turning down, because he will opt out, a one-year $22.5 million deal offer. And so why on earth would you not then back that up by offering him 1 year and $19.65 million, less money than he's already rejected? And so it's just a formality. They'll give it to Rodon, he'll reject it. So he's going to opt out twice. He's going to opt out and then he's going to reject. And then he's going to be a true free agent. But then he's got this qualifying offer, draft pick compensation tied to his free agency, which can be a pretty big deal. And what it means basically is that if Rodon ends up signing elsewhere, the Giants will get draft pick compensation. I think between rounds 2 and 3, it's kind of complicated. I'll certainly pull that up later when this actually happens. We'll talk about what the actual consequences are for the Giants if they don't bring him back. But they'll receive draft pick compensation for him leaving. And if the Giants re-sign him, then there's none of that. So it hurts the free agency of players who receive it. Players don't like the qualifying offer, and they tried to get rid of it in the new collective bargaining agreement, and they almost did, but they didn't. So it's still here, and it still exists, and so Carlos Rodon, obvious candidate, he'll get one. A lot of the top free agents out there will get one. Judge, Trey Turner, guys like this, they will get one, and it'll be an easy reject because it's a 1 year almost $20 million deal, and they're in line to get hundreds of millions of dollars. So they'll reject it, but then it hurts their free agency because teams don't want to have to give up that draft pick in order to sign the player. But when they're good enough, they do it anyway, but it hurts the value a little bit. But for Joc Pederson, it's a case worth discussing. Just right off the bat, I'm going to tell you that I do not think the Giants will offer this to him, and I'm going to explain why in some detail. So basically, the reason that I don't think the Giants would offer Joc Pederson what amounts to a 1-year, $19.65 million deal is because I think he would accept it. And you might be saying, wouldn't that be a good thing? You'd be bringing back Joc Pederson. And then I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate with myself here and point out that the production of Joc Pederson, which, to put it in a succinct number in terms of like wins above replacement, I think he was at 2.1 Fangraphs wins above replacement. We can put a dollar figure on what that type of production is worth. And according to Fangraphs, it was worth this year about $16.5 million. From Dan Szymborski, who does Zips projections, this is kind of high level stuff that a lot of people might not care about, but he actually has found that it's not linear in terms of what teams pay per win above replacement. They pay less for the first one and more for subsequent WAR, if that makes any sense. Like a one WAR player, teams aren't bending over backwards to pay the same as they're willing to pay for that second one and that third one and that fourth one per win. And so according to Szymborski, the first one is worth just $5.3 million in terms of what do teams pay in the open market. And the subsequent WAR are worth $9.3 million. And so if you take that accounting, it's actually more like 15 million as opposed to 16 and a half for Joc Pederson. So regardless, these numbers are kind of agreeing. 15 to 16 million dollars was what the production was worth in 2022. And so when I say I'm playing devil's advocate with myself, you can easily talk yourself into thinking, okay, let's say you don't think I'm crazy for throwing out these numbers. You're fine with these, wins above replacement, dollars per WAR. You're fine and humoring me when I talk about this. But then I say, okay, he's worth $16 million, and the qualifying offer is just $19.6 million. It's close enough, right? And so you could see if you want Joc Pederson back, and I'm saying I think he would accept this offer if you gave it to him, because it's probably more than he's worth, and it would hurt his free agency among, in terms of trying to sign with another team. So you can kind of talk yourself into it from that regard. But the reason I don't think it's worth it, like I said, because I think he would accept it. And why is that a problem? Because this takes place early in the offseason. Teams have to make a decision on who to give qualifying offers to in November. Like within a month, the Giants would have to make this decision, and then players have 10 days to make their decision. They get to kind of explore the market and see what their value is out there before making a call on this. And I just don't think the Giants want to tie themselves in to a player who is flawed defensively. He was one of the worst defenders in the game, according to a lot of different metrics. And this is just such a big offseason in which they need to make significant improvements that, because they've been a little bit tight with their spending and their payroll hasn't exactly ballooned here. It's actually been stagnant for a few years at a modest number of about $162 million. And so do you want to commit almost $20 million to a flawed but useful player on a 1-year deal? I just think that it's not something that they would do. And I understand the case that it's possibly close to the value you might actually be getting, but I just think they can get that production even from Pederson. Like the free agent deal he ultimately gets may end up being, $10 million per year over 2 or 3 years, something like that. I don't know exactly. $12 million per year over 2 or 3 years, perhaps. So while it may be like last year, for example, they didn't give the qualifying offer, even though they could have, to Alex Wood and Anthony DeSclafani, both of whom were really good for them the previous season. they didn't do that, but they did end up bringing them back on more kind of fair and market rate deals. And so I just don't think it's worth it for the San Francisco Giants to give out this qualifying offer to Joc Pederson, even though it may actually be close to what his value is in a 1-year situation. So coming up next, remember when everyone said the Giants were doomed because the San Diego Padres went out and traded for Juan Soto? We're going to revisit that conversation and also look at the Phillies, who finished in third place behind two 100-win teams, and yet there they are in the NLCS. So we're going to relate that to the Giants in just a second. But first, you guys know me. I'm all about the numbers, and the numbers don't lie in this case. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters, and I know because I use SimpliSafe in my own home. They protect you with cutting-edge technology powered 24/7 by professional monitoring agents who always have your back. I personally love the ease of use of the app and just being able at any time, for whatever reason, it just brings me such a sense of security when I'm not home. I can check in on these crystal clear HD cameras, look all throughout my house, see what's going on, check on the cat, and in addition, SimpliSafe professional agents have your back 24/7. And if there's a detection of something gone wrong, they will verify it and dispatch security, cops, whatever it is, to your home at the highest priority. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. It's a great value. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. All right, as promised, there's a lot more to get to. We're going to discuss. I wanted to revisit this whole kind of Juan Soto conversation. Congratulations to the Padres. I mean, my goodness, knocking out the Dodgers in the first round. Hilarious. Ha! Dodgers won 111 games in the regular season, and they won one more game than the Giants in the postseason. Hilarious. I can't believe it. Padres, Phillies, right? If we're being real with ourselves, is there anybody who seriously predicted that was going to be the NLCS? There may be a few people here and there, but like 99.99% of anyone who tried to predict what the NLCS was going to be did not have Padres versus Phillies, if we're being honest, right? And I feel like we've got to be honest here because I'm trying to make a point, but it requires honesty. And the point is that what I said when the Padres acquired Soto was that as Giants fans, we need to be less worried about what the Dodgers are doing and what the Padres are doing. There was this huge panic among Giants fans about, because you've got these two really good teams in your division, the Giants are screwed. They're in trouble. They're doomed. And my counterpoint was that that's not true. You just simply need, because if you had to win the division just to get into the playoffs, then yeah, I would say you are in trouble. But these days, you either win the division or you don't. And if you don't, there's literally 3 spots in addition to winning the division up for grabs. Like, you can have 4 teams from the NL West, in theory, making the playoffs every year. It could happen. And so it's really, you need to look at the National League, and just what you need to be is one of the top 6 teams in the National League. And if you're one of the top 6 out of 15 teams in your league, you're going to the playoffs. And if you go to the playoffs, as we're seeing right now, these are the 2 road wildcard teams. These are the 2 bottom seeds in the entire league. And this is not a super unusual thing in baseball. In baseball, the postseason is just a lot of who plays well when it goes on. The Padres and the Mets, people overwhelmingly Mets favored. The Padres and the Dodgers, overwhelmingly Dodgers favored. The Phillies and the Cardinals, I didn't do an official prediction, but the Phillies in that series because of the starting pitching. with Nola and Wheeler. A little bit underrated for the Phillies there. And they sweep the Cardinals in that little best of three. And then the Phillies versus the Braves. Braves are overwhelming favorites. If I'm being honest with myself, I would have picked the Braves. And yet, though, that's your NLCS. And so nothing better illustrates my point than that. And it also, like, the Padres are a good example of that, but it might be confusing for me to say, don't worry about the Padres, and yet the Padres are in the NLCS. But I think the Phillies even better exemplify what I'm trying to say here, because in their division, they finished in third behind two teams that won 101 games, the Mets and the Braves. Mets and the Braves are going home, are already done. Mets and the Braves have been eliminated. The third place Phillies, who won 87 games. Again, the Mets and Braves, 101 wins each. The 87 win Phillies are the team that's in the NLCS. So I'm not saying, yes, be happy with an 87 win team. But what I am saying is it's clearly not being doomed to be in that position. And in baseball, you get in and you just roll the dice, because in my opinion, there's a lot of just randomness that goes into who ends up advancing in the playoffs. And that's just the reality of the situation. We could talk on and on about the fact that the teams with byes, the teams that got to skip that wild card round, so far 2 have been eliminated. And if the Yankees lose tonight, it'll be 3 out of the 4 teams with byes were eliminated. If the Yankees win, it'll be 2 out of the 4. So it'll take more years to really see if the byes end up being a net negative for those teams. Ultimately, it's not going to be a negative, because by skipping the first round, you guarantee that you won't get eliminated in that first round. So even if you have a 50-50 chance of getting knocked off by a lesser team in the second round, the NLDS or the ALDS either, you still got to avoid the chance of getting eliminated in the first round. So it's ultimately going to be a positive no matter what, I would say. But it may be that you have perhaps even a disadvantage versus the team that wins. Like if you can guarantee that you're going to win the wild card round, then you may have an advantage, maybe. Or at least maybe it's closer than it otherwise would be if there wasn't the long layoff. But obviously better to skip that wild card series, because you might lose it and go home before you even get to play that team that's been resting for 5 days or 6 days, whatever it was. So the reality is, as a Giants fan, I just don't worry so much about the Dodgers roster and the Padres roster. I think the Giants need to just take care of their own business, make themselves as good as possible. But if they become a team that gets into the playoffs every year, I like their chances. And I would have thought they had just as good of a shot. I mean, no, this year's roster had obvious flaws, but from a pitching standpoint, starting pitching specifically, not the pen, really from a starting pitching standpoint, Rodon and Webb and even Cobb, that is not a trio that you would want to go up against. I mean, think of the Padres, right? People thought they would get blown out here twice, and they've become that kind of dangerous team. And so it doesn't take much to put yourself in that position. And you might be thinking, it's different because they have star talent. Well, there are teams that don't, and there are teams that do. I mean, look at the Cleveland Guardians. Yes, they have Jose Ramirez, but can you name 5 other players on the Cleveland Guardians? Those really into baseball perhaps can, but a national audience doesn't even know 95% of the players on that team, and yet there they are pushing the Yankees to the brink and possibly moving on with just one more win tonight. So you can just get in is kind of my philosophy. I want them to try to be as good as possible, but they're not somehow doomed by whatever the Padres do. So anyway, with that discussion said, coming up next, Bruce Bochy. Is he going to be the next manager of the Texas Rangers? It could very well happen. We'll get into it in just a second. But first, all right, as promised, just a couple of other notes here. I wanted to point out Ken Rosenthal reported over the weekend that Bruce Bochy met with Rangers general manager Chris Young, and that the Rangers are in the process of hiring a manager, which we knew. But, you know, the whole situation here with Bochy, the retirement, which then like a few months later, he kind of was in it doing an interview and made it sound like he wanted to manage again. And so I think that Bochy just kind of read the room and determined that it was time to move on for a number of reasons. But it is like really fair, I think, very the right thing to do for Bochy, and just a humble kind of thing to do, because the Giants went out and hired a new president of baseball operations, and it's only right that that person who's being given like total control over the direction of the team shouldn't have to like inherit an unfireable manager. I know this is kind of a touchy subject, I would imagine, but I think it was the right thing to do for Bochy. And a lot of like what Kapler has brought to the San Francisco Giants is, don't think so much about Kapler himself per se, like, because I think there's there's more focus than there should be on the individual manager themselves, and kind of thinking that they make so much of a difference by just, I don't know, bullpen moves, I guess. Yes, it can make a difference, but ultimately, I think what Kapler has brought to this team that has added a ton of value is his connections and coaching staff, and the mindset of development at the major league level. None of that stuff was really going on with Bochy. And I don't mean none of that stuff, but like in terms of the severely modern tilt that the Giants coaching staff brings to the table, in terms of like the swing changes and all kinds of stuff, the pitching development stuff that we've seen. Like, think about Logan Webb. He was not performing well until he was in the last couple of years. And it's attributable, and Camilo Doval as well, to the coaching staff. And then look at when Brandon Crawford had his fourth place MVP season, and Buster Posey rebounded so well after taking a year off, and Brandon Belt kind of blossoming. A lot of that is attributable to the coaching staff, the new coaching staff that was entirely hired by Gabe Kapler. And so a lot of the value that Kapler brings is by bringing in this coaching staff and having this whole different kind of major league development operation. And Bochy is kind of the old school. He is not well versed in that stuff, I would imagine. And but anyway, I think that it's a very intriguing opportunity to go manage the Texas Rangers if he is offered that position. They do have Donnie Ecker, which is kind of ironic given everything I just said. I'm not saying that Bochy couldn't have been the manager and you could have all those coaches hired around him. But I think as the manager, you kind of want authority over who are your coaches. And so it was just time, in my opinion. That whole era is over, and it's a new era, I would say. But I'm not saying Bochy like couldn't manage the Giants anymore, but I think it made sense at the time, and it still does. And it would be very interesting to see him go to the Texas Rangers and see how he could do. Bochy is beloved in this game, and I think that he could do a great job anywhere he goes. But it would be interesting to see how does he blend kind of the new school coaching philosophies with just being that kind of stabilizing manager presence. I think it can work. We've seen it. Dusty Baker is kind of in that position right now, and Buck Showalter kind of in that position right now, with kind of modern tilted teams with kind of a traditional manager. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I'm not sure that it would be a pretty sight for Giants fans to see Bochy managing another team, especially if the Giants have more struggles and say the Rangers kind of take a step forward. That would be tough to see for Giants fans, but it's the reality. He is out there exploring these opportunities. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.